Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we are going to be looking at something pretty different, exploring how understanding a joke, or even like just disliking a specific drink, can help us better understand pain.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
our guide for this is an article from Spinal Physio called The Funny Thing About Whiskey.
Yeah, and it really is a funny thing when you think about it. Like, what does whiskey have to do with pain? But the article makes some good points.
All right, I'm intrigued. I'm ready to dive in. So Hunt talks about this concept of thinking fast and slow, which comes from Daniel Kahneman's work.
Oh, yeah, Kahneman's brilliant.
Could you give us a quick rundown of what that means?
Sure, Kahneman basically says our brains have two modes, right? One's fast, intuitive, driven by emotion, almost like a reflex.
Okay.
It's that fight or flight kind of response. And then there's the slower system, which is more deliberate and analytical, using logic and reason.
So it's almost like we've got two brains in one.
In a way, yeah.
And I guess the key is figuring out how to balance those two systems.
Exactly, especially when we're talking about pain.
Right, so like if I touch a hot stove
Yeah,
and my hand jerks back before I even register the pain, that's fast thinking, right?
exactly. It's survival mechanism, you know.
Yeah.
And the article points out that comedians often use this fast thinking to get a laugh. So think about those jokes
Yeah.
that make you laugh before you've even really processed what you've heard.
I can picture like classic slapstick, someone slipping on a banana peel or something, that instant reaction.
Exactly, it's instant. But just like with pain, humor is subjective too, right?
Yeah.
What sends one person into fits of laughter might leave someone else totally cold.
Totally.
And the article uses this to point out that pain isn't just a physical sensation, but it's also a perception that's shaped by our individual experiences and our context.
So you mean like
Yes.
my personal history
Mm-hmm.
or my mood or even my culture could influence how I experience pain.
Absolutely. It's like everyone has their own unique pain filter.
Interesting.
So stress, for example,
Yeah.
can amplify pain signals. You know, if
Wow.
you're already anxious, a minor ache might feel much worse.
Makes sense. And I'm guessing past injuries also play a role.
Definitely. Let's say you've injured your back lifting weights in the past. Even years later, your brain might overreact. And trigger pain.
Mm.
When you bend over to pick up, I don't know, like pencil, even though there's no real threat.
Right. So it's like our brain's trying to protect us. It's like, whoa, remember that time you hurt yourself? Let's not risk it again.
Exactly.
Even if it's totally harmless now.
Exactly. And that's where things get interesting.
And Hunt uses this really interesting example, something about bending over to pick up a shopping bag.
Yeah, so imagine someone bends down to pick up a bag and they suddenly feel a sharp pain.
Oh, I can see that happen.
Even though they've done that same movement a million times before without any problem.
Right.
And that's what's so interesting, because it shows us that pain isn't always a direct result of an injury.
So it's not always a clear-cut cause and effect.
Right. Sometimes it's more about how our brain interprets the situation.
And that interpretation can be influenced by a lot of different things.
Exactly. Stress, tiredness, past experiences, even our mood can all play a role.
So in other words, our brain might be sending out these pain signals even when there's no real threat. And that brings us to the importance of context, right?
Absolutely.
Because just like a comedian's joke might land differently depending on the audience, our pain response can vary wildly depending on all sorts of factors.
That's true.
So on Monday, picking up that shopping bag might be totally fine, no problem.
Right.
But then Tuesday morning, the same movement triggers a massive pain flare-up.
Exactly. It can feel really random.
It does. It makes you wonder if certain activities are inherently good or bad.
I see what you mean.
But maybe it's not that simple. Maybe it's more about understanding how our brains are interpreting those sensations.
You're getting at something really important there, and it leads to a fascinating part of Hunt's work.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He suggests that we can actually retrain our brains to respond to pain more effectively.
Really? So it's like we can learn to take the wheel from the autopilot.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those automatic responses and choosing a different path.
All right, how do we do that? How do we start to rewire those ingrained pain responses?
Well, to understand that, we need to talk about something kind of surprising. Whiskey aversion.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so think about this. A lot of people have a particular drink they just can't stand.
Oh, yeah, I know a few people like that.
And it's often because of one bad experience.
Right. Like one night they had a bit too much and it didn't end well.
Exactly. Hunt uses the example of Jack Daniels. Someone might have overindulged, had a terrible reaction, and now even the thought of Jack Daniels makes them feel sick.
So their brain has basically linked Jack Daniels with feeling awful.
Yeah, even though logically they know one sip probably wouldn't have the same effect now,
Right.
their body reacts like it's a threat.
It's amazing how powerful those subconscious associations can be.
It really is.
It makes me wonder if something similar happens with pain.
Go on.
Could our past experiences with pain be creating those same automatic reactions,
Hmm.
even when there's no real danger?
That's exactly what Hunt suggests, yeah. Just like with whiskey aversion, our past pain can create these learned associations. Certain movements, activities, even places can become triggers.
And those triggers send our nervous system into overdrive.
Exactly. Even if the actual threat is long gone, it's like our brains are stuck in the past, reacting to the ghost of pain.
Okay, so how do we break free? If we can't just tell our brains to chill out, how do we actually retrain those responses?
Well, one approach is through gradual exposure,
Hmm.
kind of like how someone might overcome a whiskey aversion.
Okay, interesting.
You start by exposing yourself to the trigger in small, manageable doses.
So like baby steps.
Exactly, and you slowly build up your tolerance over time.
Okay, so if bending over to pick things up triggers my back pain, I might start with some gentle back stretches, then work up to picking up lighter objects.
Right, and eventually heavier ones.
Kind of like easing back into things.
Precisely. But it's really important to do this in a safe way,
Yeah, of course.
listening to your body and respecting its limits.
You don't want to push through the pain?
No, it's more about gently nudging those boundaries as you feel more comfortable.
It sounds like a delicate balance between pushing those limits, but also honoring what your body is telling you.
It is, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. But before we move on, I want to touch on the mental and emotional side of this.
Okay, because I imagine there's a lot of fear and anxiety that comes with pain.
Absolutely, especially when we try to do things that have triggered it in the past.
It's easy to get caught in a cycle of worry and avoidance.
It is, but that's where our slower, more analytical brain can help.
So we need to engage our critical thinking skills to challenge those automatic fear responses.
Exactly.
Instead of letting my brain jump to, oh no, my back is going to spasm again, I need to pause, assess, and ask myself, is this fear based on actual evidence?
Yes. Or is just my brain reacting to a past experience?
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
And this is where understanding the limbic system comes in.
Remind me, what's the limbic system again?
It's the part of our brain responsible for those fight or flight responses. It's there to protect us,
Right.
but sometimes it gets a little overzealous, sending out those pain signals even when there's no real threat.
So it's like we need to reassure our limbic system.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for looking out, but I got this.
Uh-huh, exactly. It's about reclaiming that sense of control.
Okay, that makes sense. But still, it sounds like a lot of work.
It does take effort and consistency, I won't lie.
Is it really possible to rewire those deeply ingrained pain responses? Especially if we've been struggling with them for years.
Well, the good news is that our brains are incredibly adaptable.
Really? Even after all that time?
Yeah, because of something called neuroplasticity, which basically means our brains can change and rewire themselves throughout our lives.
Wow, that's encouraging.
It's a constant process of learning and adaptation.
So there's hope for change.
Absolutely. It might take some time and patience,
Okay.
but with the right approach, we can learn to manage those pain responses and regain our freedom to move and live without fear.
That sounds amazing, to be able to move and live without that constant fear of pain holding you back.
It is, and that's what we're all striving for, right? To live our lives to the fullest, even with pain.
So it's almost like we need to find a way to reassure our brains, like, hey, calm down, it's not as bad as you think.
Exactly. It's like you're telling your limbic system, hey, I appreciate you trying to protect me, but I'm okay, really?
But that's easier said than done, right? I mean, how do we actually convince our brains to chill out when it comes to pain?
Well, one way is to think about it like we talked about with the whiskey aversion. Remember how we talked about gradual exposure? We can do something similar with pain.
So if a certain movement triggers my pain, I just start doing it a little bit at a time, slowly increasing it.
Exactly. You gradually expose yourself to the trigger, but the key is to do it in a safe and controlled way.
Okay, so I'm not trying to push through the pain, but rather slowly build up my tolerance to it.
Exactly. You got to listen to your body's cues and respect its limits. If you push too hard, too fast, you could actually make things worse.
That makes sense. But what about the mental and emotional side of things? I mean, pain can be scary, especially if you've had bad experiences in the past. How do we deal with that fear and anxiety?
That's where the slower, more analytical part of our brain comes in. We need to use our critical thinking skills to challenge those automatic fear responses.
So instead of freaking out and thinking, oh no, here we go again, I need to stop and think, is this pain really a sign of danger? Or is it just my brain overreacting?
Exactly. You got to ask yourself, is this fear based on actual evidence, or am I just reacting to a past experience?
It's almost like we have to become detectives of our own pain.
And that's where understanding the role of the limbic system can be so helpful. Remember, it's designed to protect us, but sometimes it can be a little overprotective, sending out those pain signals even when there's no real threat.
So it's like we need to teach our limbic system to chill out a bit.
Yeah, in a way, it's about reclaiming that sense of control and agency over our pain experience.
It's really empowering to think that we have more control over our pain than we might realize.
It is.
Yeah.
But it all starts with awareness. We need to
Yeah.
recognize when our brain might be reacting on autopilot and then consciously choose to engage that slower, more analytical part of ourselves.
So it's about being present in the moment, paying attention to what's happening in our bodies,
Yeah.
and making conscious choices about how we respond to pain.
Exactly. And that's when things start to get really interesting because it suggests that we're not powerless in the face of pain. We have the ability to retrain our brains, manage those responses, and ultimately reclaim our freedom to move and live without fear.
That sounds amazing. But let's be real, it also sounds like a lot of work. Is it really possible to rewire those deeply ingrained pain responses, especially if we've been struggling with them for years?
It definitely takes effort and consistency. I won't sugarcoat it. But the good news is that our brains are incredibly adaptable. It basically means that our brains can change and rewire themselves throughout our lives. It's a constant process of adaptation and learning.
So even if we've been stuck in these pain patterns for years, there's still hope for change.
Absolutely. It might take time and patience, but with the right approach, we can learn to manage those responses and reclaim our freedom to move and live without fear. And that's really the ultimate goal, isn't it? To live our lives to the fullest, even in the presence of pain.
Absolutely. It's about realizing that pain doesn't have to control our lives. We have the power to take back control and live the life we want.
I love that. It's about shifting our perspective from feeling like a victim of pain to becoming an active participant in our own healing journey.
The more you understand your individual pain patterns, the better equipped you'll be to manage them. And then as you start to notice those patterns, see if you can connect them to any past experiences.
That makes sense. Like if I notice my shoulder always aches when I'm working on a big deadline at work, it could be connected to the stress I'm feeling rather than any actual physical problem in my shoulder, right? Sometimes just recognizing that a pain response might be rooted in stress or past injury can help take away some of the fear and mystery surrounding it.
Yeah, because then it feels less like, oh no, something's wrong with me, and more like, okay, this is my body reacting to something specific, which means I might be able to do something about it.
Exactly. And once you've identified those potential connections, you can start to experiment with different strategies. This is where those techniques we talked about, graded exposure and mindfulness, can really come in handy.
Okay, so with graded exposure, I'm essentially teaching my brain that the trigger isn't actually dangerous. But how does mindfulness fit into all of this?
Mindfulness helps you change your relationship with the pain. Instead of getting swept away by fear and negative thoughts, you learn to just observe the sensations without judgment.
Okay, so let's say I'm dealing with that shoulder pain again. Instead of thinking this is going to last forever, I'm never going to be able to work again, I try to just notice the sensation in my shoulder without letting it take over my whole world.
Exactly. You might notice the tightness, the ache, and the warmth, but you don't have to buy into the story that your mind is creating around it.
It's almost like you're becoming a detached observer, like you're watching the pain from a distance.
That's a great way to put it. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to create that space between yourself and the pain. You know, it's important to remember that pain serves a purpose. It's our body's alarm system. It's signaling that something needs attention.
Right. So we shouldn't just try to ignore pain completely.
Exactly. It's more about learning to understand those signals and how to manage our response. Think about it this way. Just as we can gradually desensitize ourselves to a food aversion, we can also gradually expose ourselves to pain triggers, but in a controlled way.
Okay, so is that like what graded exposure is all about?
That's one of the key tools. It's like physical therapy for pain triggers. You know, let's say you have knee pain every time you climb stairs. You wouldn't start by running up 5 flights, right?
Oh, no, definitely not.
No, you'd start by maybe walking up a few steps and then gradually increasing the number as your knee gets stronger. So with graded exposure, you're slowly exposing yourself to the trigger, starting at a level that feels manageable and gradually increasing the intensity over time.
So you're kind of reteaching your brain that the trigger isn't actually dangerous?
Precisely. And just like with physical therapy, it's important to work with a qualified professional who can guide you through the process safely and effectively. But it's not just about physical exposure. There are also mental techniques that can be incredibly powerful.
Oh, yeah, we were talking earlier about how stress can make pain worse. So are there ways to, like, calm our minds down so the pain doesn't feel so intense?
Absolutely. That's where mindfulness comes in. It's about learning to pay attention to the present moment, including any pain you're experiencing, but without judgment or resistance.
I've heard of mindfulness for stress, but how does that actually work for pain?
Yeah. Okay, so imagine this. You're experiencing back pain, and your mind starts racing with thoughts like, this is never going to end, or my life is over. This kind of catastrophic thinking can actually amplify those pain signals.
Oh, yeah, I definitely do that. It's like a spiral.
Right. And so with mindfulness, you practice observing those thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them. You acknowledge the pain, but you don't let it define your entire experience.
So it's more about focusing on, like, your breath or the sensations in your body rather than just hyper-focusing on the pain itself.
Exactly. It's about being present with your experience, even the uncomfortable parts, but without judgment. And studies have shown that this can actually reduce the emotional distress that often accompanies pain.
That makes sense. So it seems like both graded exposure and mindfulness are about taking back control, not letting the pain control you.
That's a great way to put it. It's about empowering yourself to manage the pain rather than feeling like a victim of it.
That's a really good point. This whole conversation has been so helpful. It feels like I've got a new toolbox for understanding my pain.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that it's not all or nothing.
Right. It's not about completely avoiding pain or just pushing through it no matter what.
It's about finding that balance, respecting our body's signals, challenging our fears, and reclaiming our freedom to move and live fully.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about becoming an active participant in our own healing.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been really eye-opening.
My pleasure. And remember, the journey to understanding and managing pain is ongoing. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep listening to your body.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and tools to navigate your own pain experiences.
Remember, you're not alone, and there are resources available to help you every step of the way.
So keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep moving forward.
You have more power than you realize.
And until next time, happy diving.